Okay, so today we are going to talk about inflation and why you should care. And the reality is, we should all care, and it's one of the biggest reasons to buy Bitcoin or to think about investing in assets that aren't backed by the U.S. dollar. And just as a heads up, my forehead's probably going to be super shiny, and I'll probably sweat at some point. But it is so hot here today in Sydney; it's about 28 degrees Celsius. That's almost 90 degrees Fahrenheit. But anyways, in terms of inflation, it's effectively the rate of the increase in price of a basket of goods and services. So, the best way to illustrate this, I feel, is through an example. So, let's say we all live on an island, and the way we transact on this island is through seashells. And if we think about all the people on the island and all the different seashells, there are over 1,000 seashells, right? So everybody has the same type of seashells, and there are 1,000 seashells on this island. And then that's the way we save, that's the way we buy stuff, and it's just the currency of the island. Now, one day we have a massive tsunami, and fortunately, everybody's okay. But with the tsunami, we also have an increase of 1,000 seashells. The tsunami brought 1,000 new seashells on the island, so everybody's now with twice as many seashells. But initially, your first thought is probably, oh my gosh, this is a good thing. Everybody has more seashells. Well, let's think about that. All of a sudden, overnight, we have twice as many seashells, but the number of goods and services available for purchase stayed the same, right? The population stayed the same. The availability of the inventory of whatever you could buy stayed the same. So if I was a person on the island that had been saving my seashells day after day, month after month, year after year, away under my mattress or in my bank account, now that savings is worth half as much. And that's because everybody on the island has twice as many seashells. And because there are more seashells on the island, if I'm selling coconuts or making smoothies, what am I going to do? I'm going to raise my prices. Because there's more seashells on the island, anyone selling goods and services are going to raise their prices, right? So if I've been saving seashells, my savings are now worth half as much because everybody else has twice as many seashells. And if I've, before the tsunami, just been spending money, spending my seashells, buying things, investing in assets and real estate, I'm over the moon because now, since prices are going up, my real estate is going up, my stocks are going up, all the different things I bought, their value is going up just because I have more seashells and everybody has more seashells. Now, that is inflation. And if we think about it, we have our money in the bank right now, right? Let's say we have some savings and the bank is paying us how much? 0.1, 0.2% interest. The reality is it's so messed up because inflation is closer to about 40% today. And if we think about what happened, right? So in 2008, we had this massive global financial crisis. And with that, to bail out all the banks and to bail out all the private corporations, the US government and governments all around the world, they printed more money. The central bank said, you know what, we're going to bail you out. Well, where did that money come from? There wasn't a vault of trillions of dollars of cash just sitting there. The way they do it is the central banks for all the different global economies, they create this money. They just hit print and they print more money. It's like a line item, right? So the Federal Reserve now borrows from the central bank, and it's a transaction that's created out of thin air, just like this. So when COVID happened in March, and we had this massive bailout in America of $3 trillion, that $3 trillion was created just like this in midair. The central bank just said print, 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 print. And what does that do to inflation? Well, here's an alarming statistic. In the last 10 months alone, we have printed in America over 37% of the entire circulating money supply of US dollars. So all of the US dollars that have ever been created in the history of our country, almost 40% of them were printed, were created out of thin air in the last 10 months alone. So all of a sudden, there's 37% more seashells on the island. Now, if you've been saving your seashells and they're in your bank account, are your seashells worth more or are they worth less? When all of a sudden, everybody has more seashells. They're worth less. And are the prices of goods and services going to go down or are they going to go up? They're going to go up. and you're not going to notice it. Your Netflix subscription, that price is not going to change tomorrow. And that's because of this thing called the Cantillon effect. There's a French banker from the 18th century, Richard Cantillon, probably mispronouncing it, and he said that the people closest to the king, the people closest to the government and the central banks benefit the most whenever there's an increase in money supply. And we know that. We see that. Just a handful of weeks ago, America announced another stimulus package, almost $1 trillion. And with about 300 million people, every person should get a check for $3,000. But instead, they got a check for $600. And that's because there were so many toll collectors along the way, all the private interest groups and toll collectors taking their piece bit by bit, and everybody got $600. Now, that's one way. Another way is, let's think about what's going on. COVID happened in March. We have unemployment at an all-time high in the history of the global economy, right? All the countries in the world, unemployment has never been higher. More than the Great Recession, more than the financial crisis, more than World War I, World War II. So unemployment is at an all-time high, okay? In most economies, sophisticated economies around the world, 50% of that GDP comes from small and medium-sized businesses, SMBs. Well, because of lockdowns and restrictions and unemployment being so high, those businesses have shut down, whether temporarily or permanently, right? We've seen all the videos, and it hurts my heart to hear about business after business shutting down. So many businesses are shut down, more than ever before, more than the Great Recession and financial crisis and the world wars, more than the Spanish flu, right? And unemployment is at an all-time high. Why is the stock market at an all-time high? The stock market for most countries around the world is at an all-time high, which means it's never been higher in the history of our time. An all-time high means it's never been higher. So more people have lost their jobs. More businesses have shut down than ever before. But our stock prices have never been higher. And that's because of this thing called the Cantillon effect, right? The Cantillon effect, where the people closest to the government, people closest to the king or the central bank, they benefit the most. Because when we print money just like this, that money goes to the institutions. It goes to the banks. It goes to the private interest groups, right? It goes to the airlines that we bailed out. And what do they do with the money? They buy back their shares. They pay themselves bonuses. And the middle class, they're the ones that get hurt the most. The bottom 20% of the socioeconomic ladder, they're the ones that get hurt the most. You and I, who've been working our asses off, our hard-earned dollars that we put in the bank get eroded. They're being devalued. You wake up and you're a bit more poor. You wake up tomorrow, your dollars are worth less. Next week, they're going to be even worth more less, right? Or they're going to be worth even more less. I guess however you say that, right? They're going to be worth less, even more so. So that is the reality of the situation. And now we've heard about this thing called CPI. And CPI stands for the Consumer Price Index. And the government comes out and says, oh, you know what? The CPI is what we use to measure inflation. It's between 0 and 2.5%. Well, the CPI is also called the CPI. It's completely rigged. In 1983, the U.S. Bureau of Labor started cooking the books because inflation was so high in 1983 in America, right? It was rampant, 10, 15%. And when inflation's high and the government has to pay out pensions, so anyone who's worked in law enforcement, senior citizen, Social Security, they have to pay out those payments, right? They wanted to reduce that. So they came up with this thing called the CPI, and they started rigging it. They started cooking the books, and they said, you know what? We're going to change the goods and services. So my water bottle, apple, orange, and notebook, I don't have to measure how much that costs next year. I can just measure other items and goods and services so I can show that inflation's 2.5%. When the reality is by printing more money, by increasing the number of seashells on the island, inflation is 10, 15, 20%. So there's this index. There's a guy. His name's Ed Batowski. I'm going to probably mispronounce that too. And he came out with this thing called the Chapwood Index. And he came out with it because he was so tired of seeing the middle class and so many Americans, even the people getting their pension payments, your salary, it's fixed, right? It's pegged to the CPI, which is 0 to 2.5% according to the Fed and the central banks. So as we print more money, it's not like your salaries are going up, right? But the stock market's going up. That's a Cantillon effect. And the people who receive Social Security benefits, pension payments, they're barely able to survive because the prices of goods and services are slowly going up year after year after year, but the money they get in terms of that pension payment, it's staying the same, right? So they need bailouts and assistance from their families and people around them. Now, the middle class is also hurting a lot too, because we keep our money in the bank and we have inflation for the last several years since 2008, on average being about 20%. In the last 10 months alone, inflation's gone up about 40%. When Biden comes to office, he's introducing this new stimulus plan that's going to be $3-4 trillion, right? What does that do to your dollars? It devalues them even more. And the chairman of the Federal Reserve came out, the head of the central bank came out a little while ago and said, look, we're not going to stop printing money. We can print as much money as we need to. We're going to print our way out of this. And it's not just America. Economies all around the world are printing money. I live here in Australia. Just several weeks ago, they announced quantitative easing. It's a fancy way of saying we're printing over $100 billion for the first time, I believe, in the history of the economy or in decades. And they're doing this in every single economy around the world. So if you're printing more money all around the world, interest rates are at an all-time low. In so many countries today, interest rates are negative. That means if you want to put your money in the bank is going to charge you for holding your money. If you're in Germany and you put your money in the bank, you have to pay the bank just to put your money in there. That's called the negative interest rate. There's over $13 trillion around the world that's liable for a negative interest rate, where you're paying people to look after your money and you're not earning any interest on it. And if anything, you're paying them. That's wild. And that's only increasing. So inflation is real. It's impacting all of us. This thing called the Chapwood Index came out by a guy called Ed Batasky. He's been tracking it for a number of years. It's very legit. And it tracks the 500 most commonly bought goods and services by the average American across different cities. No seasonal adjustments, no gimmicks, nothing dicey. It's just real, raw information. And the math doesn't lie. And he says for this year, on average, generally across America, inflation's around 10 to 12%. So if you're not earning 10 to 12% interest on your dollars, they're being worth less 10 to 12% year after year just sitting there. And that sucks. That absolutely sucks. Your hard-earned dollars, your wages are staying the same. If you get a promotion or anything, it's going to be pegged to CPI, which they're saying is less than 2.5%. But we know, because we keep printing more money, and we're going to only print more money for the foreseeable future, that inflation is closer to 30%. And it's not slowing down anytime soon. In Zimbabwe, there's dollar bills for trillions of dollars. There's a $10 billion bill. There's a $10 trillion bill. Billions and trillions, because you have hyperinflation. I'm not saying America is going to be in hyperinflation, but I'm saying generally inflation around the world, no matter where you live, is going to be higher than it's ever been before. And the best way to mitigate that risk is through buying gold, buying silver. And if you want to buy digital gold, the gold of the internet, that's Bitcoin. Bitcoin has a fixed supply. Bitcoin can never be manipulated by any central bank, any government, any person, any organization, any private institution in the entire world. There will only ever be 21 billion Bitcoins mined in the history of our time. And already we've mined about 18.5 million. So if we think about it, there are over 7 billion people on the planet today, and there's ever only going to be 21 million Bitcoin in circulation for as long as we know it. Bitcoin is more divisible, more portable, more reliable, and faster to transact with than gold. What am I going to do with my gold? I'm going to carry it around in a vault. I'm going to wheel it around and hope nobody steals it from me. When I go to a restaurant, how do I pay for my meal with a bar of gold? Do I shave off a little nugget? And how does the restaurant owner know that this gold is legit, that it's mine, and that this is the right amount of shaving for this meal? So if you want to buy digital gold, you want to buy the internet of money, that's Bitcoin. And there will never be any sort of inflation with Bitcoin. There's many ways you can do it. I'll explain that in another video. This video is already getting pretty long. But in America, you buy it through Coinbase. In Australia, you can buy it through CoinSpot. You just register for an account, and then you link your bank account, and you buy some Bitcoin. And I'll talk about how you can do that in another video. The next video, I'll talk about what exactly is money, this belief of money, where does it come from, and why should you care, right? So I'll throw in my referral links. You get $10 in Bitcoin. So do I. Legitimately, there's a strong consensus that Bitcoin will be worth 10 times more than gold within the next 10 years. So if you get $10 in Bitcoin today and it appreciates over 100 times in the next 10 years, that's going to be worth over $1,000. So you may laugh and think, oh, whatever, it's $10 in terms of a referral code, but it's actually going to be worth a lot more than that, most likely over $1,000 in the next 10 years. So today we learned about inflation. CPI is bullshit. There's this thing called the Chapwood Index that accounts for the Cantillon effect, which means the people closest to the money, the king, the central governments, the governments and central banks, they benefit the most. And so in order to avoid that, the Chapwood Index tracks the most commonly bought goods and services twice a year across all of American cities. And it shows that inflation is going to be at least 10 to 12%. But we know because we're printing more and more money, it's closer to 30, 40%. And no matter where you are in the world, it's going to be higher than it's ever been before. So I hope you learned something new about inflation, and this only increased your interest in exploring this idea of Bitcoin, or saving your dollars, not putting them in a bank, putting them in a company called Celsius Network, or buying gold, buying silver, buying stocks, buying real estate, or even buying Bitcoin. Cool. Thanks for watching. See ya.